Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to the Rules of Engagement. As always, we're going to be talking about strategy and tactics using the game of Starcraft 2. I'll be your host, Nick axslav Ranish, and today we've got a couple games I want to show you guys from the MLG Spring Championship from 2013. First, we're going to talk about a Naniwa vs. Polt game, then Hero vs. Sage, then the Muslim vs. Sasquatch, and finally the viewer Q&A. So if you have any questions, send it to me on Twitter at axslav or on YouTube comments at www.youtube.com/official MLGSC2. So first segment is going to be a Naniwa vs. Polt game on TvP Harassment. I'm going to talk about a couple main things during this game. One is if you're Terran, you want to make a very safe opening, a good safe TvP opening that Polt does in this game. Then how to properly harass with Dark Templar, and then also how it impacts the game when you sacrifice your army for your opponent's economy. So we're starting this game off at the 4:30 mark. It's going to be on Neo Planet S, and this was actually, I think, like one of the last rounds of MLG Anaheim Spring Championship. So a very important game here between Naniwa and Polt. And we can see Polt open for the command center first. One of the strongest builds in Terran versus Protoss. You want to get that economy going straight away. Then you want to get a bunker early. And the reason why you want to get that bunker is in case a stalker crosses the map, in case a zealot bothers you, you don't have to worry about having to lose those early few Marines to the stalker zealot combination. Then he's adding 2 more barracks. Now, a lot of players instead try to attack a little bit faster, which I personally prefer, and I think it's great, but Polt just really wants to make sure that he can survive the early game with this build. So adding 2 more barracks, then getting his gases to go ahead and tech up. And the idea of this is he wants to get a high Marine count so he can deal with any aggression, he can deal with an Oracle, or whatever comes his way. Also notice how he's scouting the top for a potential proxy Stargate. Then he also, if you look at his vision, he wants to double check to see what his opponent has in a natural. He's already identified the expansion from his opponent. But there's a lot of builds that involve, you know, mass gateway attacks after expansion. So he wants to check to see, is that a possibility? If he can get into the main and identify any tech buildings, that's ideal. So ideally he'll see, is there a robo in the main? Is there forges going up? Then there's no attack. But if he can't identify those things, if he doesn't know exactly what's going on, he sees 3 sentries. 3 sentries is a lot of sentries for this point in the game. Could easily be some type of sentry zealot timing. So he goes ahead and adds this second bunker right here just to be safe. And one of the most important things by adding these extra bunkers is you're never going to lose a game because you got 1 extra bunker. You can just salvage it. It costs you 25 minerals and 100 minerals up front. It's not a big deal to get the second bunker. You'll sometimes lose games from not having enough bunkers. You're almost never going to lose a game from having too many bunkers. So next thing I want to talk about is Naniwa has actually gone for a Dark Shrine. We can see it's down here. It has not been spotted yet by Polt. And in fact, Polt's never going to spot this game. He's just trying to test Polt, see if he can get into main doing damage to the sentries. The idea of this tactic is that if the Marines are on the natural, you can unload the sentries, force field the ramp, warp in some more units, and get very good trades against the Terran because they can only use units that have been rallied out from their barracks and factories, as well as some SCVs. So they're going to have to pull the SCVs, so you can get a lot of SCV kills. Then you can get out of there with the sentries and just trade some zealots for those SCVs. Now, Polt's aware of the threat of the drop, so he's building a missile turret at the top left. Now, he doesn't want to surround everything with missile turrets because that's a lot of money to try to build a whole bunch of missile turrets just against 1 war prism. But if he thinks about where he's going to have his army, it's going to be always around this zone in the front entryway. And so the most vulnerable spot to a drop is at this very top left. So that's where he puts the missile turret to force all the action more towards where his army wants to be. Now the Dark Templar harass has started, and the most important part about Dark Templar harass is always split up your DTs. So 1 DT in the main, 1 DT in the natural. And never have more than 1 DT in the same zone because you don't want to have multiple DTs taken out by a single scan. Now there are some situations where you do want to group them up, like maybe if you know the Zerg player has no detection, you want to kill a hatchery before an Overseer morphs, or maybe if you're 100% sure there's no scans for the Terran and you really want to do a lot of damage to a certain zone. But unless you have that information, which you're really not going to have, pretty much always 1 DT at a time. So 1 DT at the main. Up here, if you can kill this turret, you can force another scan out as well. 1 DT at the natural. Never group multiple DTs at once. Because the whole idea of this is, you don't want to warp in 5, 6, 7, 8 DTs. You want to warp in 1, 2, 3 DTs. Why do you not want to warp in so many? Well, if you warp in that many DTs, 5, 6, 7, you can't do critical damage, which you're not going to do against Polt most likely. You're going to be very far behind. But this game, he warped in 1, 2, or 3 DTs. He got a couple SCV kills here, a decent number. He forced out 2 scans already, a 3rd scan's probably going to have to come down. He's killed some depots, some missile turrets. He's done very good damage for what he's lost. And because he only used 2 or 3 DTs, look at what he has behind us, right? He's going straight for Colossi. He's getting double forge upgrades. So the DT rush isn't an all-in. Yes, if it does no damage, he'll be a little bit behind because the forges and Colossi tech are a little bit delayed. But as long as he can do something, he has a very strong transition after this. So he's already gotten ahead just from a very well-controlled DT harass, and there's always a threat that he can poke back in with War Prism, drop a DT here. He can even go after this Tech Lab. That could be nice. He could just interfere with depots and force more scans out. A lot of cool utility from the DT. So that's the first step, is the Protoss harass. Now, it's basically the Terran's turn to harass. And if you're Terran and you have Medivacs and Stem Bio and your opponent doesn't have Phoenixes, which most Protoss don't go for Phoenixes, drop play is often a very good idea. Now, there's 2 things to consider in drop play. 1, if all my units are outside of my base, could he potentially kill me with an attack? Now, in this situation, Polt knows Naniwa doesn't have a significant army because of the DT play and then the Colossi upgrade transition. So he knows he's safe from an immediate attack. Number 2 is, can I make sure that I don't lose these units for nothing? Now, at the level that Polt plays versus Naniwa, of course, he's not going to lose these Medivacs. Unless his opponent gets Blink, which Naniwa now has, but up until now hasn't had. There's no way the Medivacs are going to be caught by Stalkers because he's fast enough to control them very well. And of course have the great macro behind it at the same time. But for you guys at home, you may not want to do drop play unless you see a very big opening. Just because, yes, it's often great. It's in theory a no-loss situation. But in practice, while you're trying to do the drop play, you often make macro errors, or you might mess up your control and lose some units and drops. So the most important part of drop play is not to lose the drops unless you see a very big opening. Again, DT harass, you see only 1 DT at a time. A couple SCVs in the scan is always good, and maybe you could get a lot more if his opponent was a little bit less prepared. So the next stage is Polt knows he's a little bit behind. He wants to do some good damage. So he's going to make a slightly risky move here. What he's going to do is he's going to send some units around the left side. And then once those are ready to check on this space, just make sure there's a nexus here. He's also going to send some units around the bottom. Let's just fast forward just a little bit. Exactly the split up I was talking about. So a small squad here. And why this is risky is because his medevac count, if you look at the medevac count, it's not very high. This is one of the weaknesses of a Terran with only a single starport against Colossi tech, because he had to get all the Vikings, right? He had to get these Vikings to deal with the Colossi of the Protoss. And in fact, he still needs a lot more Vikings to deal with 4 Colossi, which is why he's actually not producing. But I'm sure he's going to start producing momentarily. But it's very hard to get a good medevac count. And without a good medevac count, it's hard to do the no-risk attacks. Because the reason why attacks aren't risky is because you can pick up and leave the medevacs. But for example, this group right here is very vulnerable. If a group of charge lots found this squadron, it would be sliced to pieces, and Nano would have a significant advantage. But the idea is, Polt says, you know what? I know I'm a little behind because of the DT damage. He doesn't know the exact supply differential, but Terran normally wants to be about 20 to 30 supply ahead in the game going in this direction, and he doesn't have that advantage. So he's taking a small risk very intelligently. And what he's going to do is he's going to try to attack 2 locations and know that, okay, Nano doesn't have the great observer coverage because of the way he opened, so I can find an advantage, right? I can attack here and here, and most likely one of them won't have enough defense. So like Naniwa sent 2 Zealots, a Cannon, and a Colossus over here. Not quite enough, so this space is very vulnerable. Now the downside is this force right here is of course going to take some losses because it's fighting massively superior numbers. Losing 3 Vikings is a pretty big blow. And then of course there's a recall back to this Nexus. He's going to actually get the... Yeah, he is going to get this Nexus. But again, he lost another significant squadron of units. So he's in a situation where he killed a Nexus, but he lost 3 Vikings plus a few random units here, and then he lost this entire squad. And yes, he did kill a Colossus and 2 Zealots, but overall he lost much more army than Naniwa did in those engagements. And we can see now Naniwa's up by about 1,000 resources in army supply. So that's not a good situation. What makes it even worse is that there's not really enough Vikings. He lost the 3 Vikings, which is huge because now he's stuck with 6 Vikings against 3 Colossi. Once he gets up to 9, that may be okay, but still not ideally what he wants. Anytime you're in a situation where you just traded a lot of your army for your opponent's economy, you know that your next step should be make sure you can't die to a counterattack. Because if you have a small army, that means, a counterattack's looking good for them because they're stronger. if they have a smaller economy, that means they actually want to attack right now, because over time, you're going to grow your army faster than them. So Polt knows Naniwa's probably going for this counterattack, and he sets up a great spread here, right? This is a great spread if your opponent is engaging this direction, except for one thing. If you think about the army Naniwa has, it's got a lot of charge lots that are 2-2 upgraded. And the army that Polt has, if the Hellbats can kill all the charge lots, then it's going to be great. If they can't immediately kill the charge lots, with only 8 Hellbats against the Archon and all the DPS from the Colossi as well, they probably won't be able to kill all the charge lots that quickly. So, if you can't kill the charge lots instantly, you always want to kite back as a Terran. Now, kiting back is pretty simple in the open area, but look at the way his units are spread. These units up here, if they kite back, they're going to end up, they actually can't go straight back. They have to go diagonally down, right? And when they go diagonally down, these units here are going to bump into them, and all the units are going to get clumped up. When they get clumped up, they get more vulnerable to Archons and to Colossi, and of course, they're getting trapped by force fields as well. So that's something that Paul has to be very careful of going forward. If he doesn't have to kite back, this is a great formation. If he does have to kite backwards, all of a sudden, this terrain of the cliff to his base starts really, really working against him. So you have to ask yourself as a Terran, okay, if I want to kite back, maybe what I should do is instead position my units, some units here and some units here, and then these units can kite back this way, and these units can kite back that downwards. Now, of course, the third is a little bit vulnerable then, but you can try to kind of backstab the Protoss and to go to third and play a little bit of dancing game. It's pretty tricky, but this terrain overall is pretty difficult to engage as a Terran. Maybe you could, if you could find multiple fronts, you could split guys up here. But notice how as soon as he kited backwards, the units all got clumped up, and as soon as they get clumped up, you're very vulnerable to all the Colossi damage, the force fields, and this whole group of units is going to get absolutely massacred there, just from so much area effect damage. And of course, the charge lots were able to close the distance, and there wasn't able to run away because of the great force fields as well there. So Nano is going to push forward here, and it looks like he's just going to go ahead and win the game. He's 30 supply up, and a good part of that supply is army value. You can see here now he's up a horrendous amount of army value from a very good engagement. Third's going to be denied, and even if he couldn't follow up and kill Polt, just killing the third is going to put him very far ahead, because now is an army advantage and his economic advantage because his own third has been reset up in the meantime. So we're going to stop the replay here. It goes on for another 2 minutes, but the game is essentially over at this point. And a couple of things to keep in mind are you should learn from this replay. The main things you should learn is going to be, as a Terran player, if you're ever afraid, just get an extra bunker early. You're never going to lose a game from getting one extra bunker early, assuming you already have 2 bases. There's no reason to get the extra bunkers on 1 base, really. Well, there are some weird builds, but in general, you want to be fast expanding. If you're scared about what they might do, just get that extra bunker. And then also later on, if you're a Protoss, you want to do some Dark Templar harass. Unless you're absolutely sure there's no scans left, there's no nearby detection, always send those Dark Templar in one at a time. Because if you send them one at a time, the worst that happens is they scan it and kill it. And then it's a small loss, but it's not even that big a loss, because 1 scan for 1 DT isn't that bad for the Protoss. It's still not great because there's so much opportunity cost that you paid in going for the Dark Templar instead of other tech routes. But it's much, much worse if you send in 3 DTs, they all died in 1 scan. All of a sudden, you're very far behind in the game instead of just 1 at a time, and you can always get some good damage done. You can run the Terran out of scans as well if you keep doing that very well. And then also, finally, if you're ever in a situation where you've traded a substantial chunk of your army for your opponent's economy, just you should be very defensively minded. That's exactly what Polt did, but unfortunately the position wasn't quite great for them, so you also got to keep eyes on the position as Terran. Make sure that you always have room to kite back without having units squished together, where all of a sudden the powerful Protoss area effect damage is very, very, very scary. So wraps up our first segment. We'll take a short break and be on to our second segment, which is going to be Hero versus Sage.